Anizethu maqhawe ase Azania kwenu akusoze kulibala kwenu kuyakukhanyisa indlela yabo bonke abaphansi kwengcindezelo Anizethu maqhawe ase Azania kwenu akusoze kulibala
Mr. Speaker, sir. Sons and daughters of Africa, Mr. Speaker has already informed you that we had hoped that this inaugural convention of the Africanists would be opened by Dr. Kamuzu Hastings Banda, failing which by Mr. Kenneth Cohen of the Zambezi African National Congress in Northern Rhodesia. Both have been unable to attend our convention, for both are now, in the language of the colonialists, detained in some concentration camps because they dared to demand the right of self-determination for the indigenous people of Nyasaland and Northern Rhodesia. The honourable task of opening this conference has therefore fallen on me, an Africanist, and I wish to thank the Central Committee for that honour. I'm particularly grateful for the opportunity this offers me to treat briefly with certain issues relevant to our struggle which, though adequately treated in the documents that will be considered by this convention, require to be presented to such a gathering. I hope then, Mr. Speaker, in the course of my address, to answer broadly questions pertaining to our stand in contemporary international politics, our relation to the states of Africa, both independent and dependent, our attitude to the entire nationalist movement in Africa, our stand on the question of race in general, and the so-called racial question in South Africa, and finally I hope to outline briefly our ultimate objectives. We are living today, sons and daughters of the soil, fighters in the cause of African freedom, in an era that is pregnant with untold possibilities for good and evil. In the course of the past 2 years, we have seen man breaking asunder with dramatic suddenness the chains that have bound his mind, solving problems that for ages have been regarded as sacrilege even to attempt to solve. The tremendous epoch-making scientific achievements in exploration of space with man-made satellites orbiting the Earth. The new and interesting discoveries made in the geophysical year, the production of rust-resistant grains of wheat in the field of agriculture, the amazing discoveries in the fields of medicine, chemistry and physics, all these mean that man is acquiring a better knowledge of his environment and is well on his way to establishing absolute control over that environment. The question then arises, where does Africa fit into this picture? And where in particular do we, the African nationalists, we Africanists in South Africa, fit in? There's no doubt that with the liquidation of Western imperialism and colonialism in Asia, the capitalist market has shrunk considerably. As a result, Africa has become the happy hunting ground of adventuristic capital. There's again a scramble for Africa, and both the Soviet Union and the United States of America are trying to win the loyalty of the African states. Africa has been wooed with more ardour than she has ever been. There's a lot of flirting going on, and of course there's some Africans flirting with the Soviet camp and some with the American camp. And in some cases the courtship has reached a stage where the parties are going out together. They're probably even holding hands in the dark. But nowhere has it yet reached the stage where parties can kiss in public without blushing. This wooing occurs at a time when the whole continent of Africa is in labour, suffering the pangs of a new birth, and everybody's looking anxiously and expectantly towards Africa to see, as our people aptly would put it, what creature will come forth. We are being wooed internationally at a time when the South African naked forces of savage Heerenvolkerism are running riot, when a determined effort is made to annihilate the African people through systematic starvation, at a time when brutal attempts are being made to retard, dwarf and stunt the mental development of our whole people through organised miseducation, at a time when thousands of our people roam the streets in search of work and are being told by the foreign rulers to go back to a home which he has assigned them, whether that means the breakup of their families or not. At a time when the distinctive badge of slavery and humiliation, the Dom Pass, is being extended from African male dog to African female bitch. It is at this time when fascist tyranny has reached its zenith in South Africa that Africa's loyalty is being competed for. And the question is, What is our answer? Our answer, Mr. Speaker, and the children of the soil, has been given by the African leaders of the continent. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah has repeatedly stated that in international affairs, Africa wishes to pursue a policy of positive neutrality, aligning herself neither with the existing blocs, but in the words of Dr. Nnamdi Akisizwe of Nigeria, remaining independent in all things but neutral in none that affect the destiny of Africa. Mr. Tom Mboya of Kenya has expressed himself more forthrightly, declaring that it is not the intention of African states to change one master, Western imperialism, for another, Soviet hegemony. We endorse the views of the African leaders on this point, but we must point out that we are not blind to the fact that countries which pursue a policy of planned state economy have outstripped in industrial development those that follow the path of private enterprise. Today, China is industrially far ahead of India. Africanists reject totalitarianism in any form and accept people's democracy. We also reject the economic exploitation of the many for the benefit of the few. We accept as policy the equitable distribution of wealth, aiming, as far as I am concerned, at equality of income, which to me is the only basis on which the slogan equal opportunities can be founded. Borrowing then the best from the East and the best from the West, we nonetheless retain and maintain our distinctive personality and refuse to be the straps or stooges of either power bloc. Our relation to the states of Africa may be stated precisely and briefly by quoting from George Padmore's book, Pan-Africanism or Communism. Discussing the future of Africa, Padmore observes that there's a growing feeling among the politically conscious Africans throughout the continent that the destiny is one, and that what happens in one part of Africa to Africans must affect Africans living in other parts. We honour Ghana as the first independent state in modern Africa, which under the courageous national leadership of Dr. Nkrumah and the Convention People's Party has actively interested itself in the liberation of the whole continent from white domination, and has held out the vision of a democratic United States of Africa. We regard it as the sacred duty of every African state to strive ceaselessly and energetically for the creation of a United States of Africa, stretching from Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar. The days of small independent African countries are gone. Today we have on the one hand great powerful countries of the world. America and Russia cover huge tracts of land and territory and numbers hundreds of millions in population. On the other hand, the small, weak, independent countries of Europe are beginning to realize that for their own survival they have to form military and enormous economic federations, hence NATO and the European market. Beside the sense of common historical fate that we share with the other countries of Africa, it is imperative for purely practical reasons that the whole of Africa be united into a single unit, centrally controlled. Only in that way can we solve the immense problems that face the continent. It is for the reasons stated above that we admire, bless, and identify ourselves with the entire nationalist movement in Africa. They are the core, the basic units, the individual cells of that large organism envisaged, namely the United States of Africa, a union of free, sovereign, independent, democratic states of Africa. For the lasting peace of Africa and the solution of the economic, social, and political problems of the continent, there needs to be a democratic principle. This means that white supremacy, under whatever guise it may manifest itself, must be destroyed. And that is what the nationalists on the continent are setting out to do. And they all agreed that the African majority must rule. In the African context, it is the overwhelming African majority that will mould and shape the content of democracy. Allow me to quote Dr. Dubois, the father of Pan-Africanism. Most men in the world, writes Dr. Dubois, are coloured. A belief in humanity means a belief in coloured men. The future of the world will, in all reasonable possibility, be what coloured men make it. And as for the world, so for Africa, the future of Africa will be what Africans make it. And now for the thorny question of race. I do not wish to give a lengthy and learned dissertation on race. Suffice to say that even those scientists who do recognize the existence of separate races have to admit that there are borderline cases which will not fit into any of the three races of mankind. All scientists agree that all men can trace their ancestry back to the first Homo sapiens, that man is distinguished from other animals and also from earlier types of man by the nature of his intelligence. The structure of the body of man provides evidence to prove the biological unity of the human species. All scientists agree that there is no race that is superior to another, and there is no race that is inferior to others. The Africanists take the view that there is only one race to which we all belong, and that is the human race. In our vocabulary, therefore, the word race, as applied to man, has no plural form. We do, however, admit the existence of the observable physical differences between various groups of people, but these differences are the result of a number of factors, chief amongst which has been geographical isolation. In Africa, the myth of race has been propounded and propagated by the imperialists and colonialists from Europe in order to facilitate and justify their inhumane exploitation of the indigenous people of the land. It is with this myth of race, with its attendant claims of cultural superiority, that the doctrine of white supremacy reigns. Thus, it is that an ex-engine driver can think of himself as fully qualified to be the head of a government of an African state, but refuse to believe that a highly educated black doctor more familiar with Western culture than the white premier is can even point blank run a municipal council. I don't wish to belabor this point. Time is precious. Let me close discussion of this topic by declaring on behalf of the Africanists, and that with the UNESCO we hold that every man is his brother's keeper, for every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main, because he's involved in mankind. In South Africa, we recognize the existence of national groups, which are the result of geographical origin within a certain area, as well as the shared historical experience of these groups. The Europeans are a foreign minority group which has exclusive control of political, economic, social, and military power. It is the dominant group. It is the exploiting group, responsible for the pernicious doctrine of white supremacy, which has resulted in the humiliation and degradation of the indigenous African people. It is this group which has dispossessed the African people of their land and with arrogant conceit has set itself up as the guardians and the trustees of the Africans. It is this group which conceives of the African people as a child nation, composed of boys and girls ranging in age from 120 years to one day. It is this group which after 300 years can still state with brazen effrontery that the native, the Bantu, the Kaffir, but they still want to remain guardians, trustees and what have you of the African people. In short, it is this group which has mismanaged affairs in South Africa, just as their kith and kin are mismanaging affairs in Europe. It is from this group that the most rabid race baiters and agitators come. It is members of this group who, whenever they meet in their parliament, say things which agitate the hearts of millions of peace-loving Africans. This is the group which turns out thousands of experts on the new South African science, the native mind. Then there's the Indian foreign minority group. This group came to this country not as imperialists or colonialists, but as indentured labourers. In the South African setup of today, this group is an oppressed minority, but there are some members of this group, the merchant class in particular, who have become tainted with the virus of cultural supremacy and national arrogance. This class identifies itself by and large with the oppressor, but significantly this is the group which provides the political leadership of the Indian people in South Africa. And all that the politics of this class have meant up to now is the preservation, defence of the sectional interests of the Indian merchant class. The downtrodden, poor, stinking coolies of Natal, who alone as a result of the pressure of material conditions can identify themselves with the indigenous African majority in the struggle to overthrow white supremacy, have not yet produced their leadership. We hope they will do so soon. The Africans constitute the indigenous group and form the majority of the population. They are the most ruthlessly exploited and are subjected to humiliation, degradation, and insult. Now it is our contention that the true democracy can be established in South Africa and on the continent as a whole, only when white supremacy has been destroyed. and the illiterate and semi-literate African masses constitute the key and the centre and the content of any struggle for true democracy in South Africa, and that the African people can be organised only under the banner of African nationalism in an all-African organisation, where they will by themselves formulate policies and programs and decide on the methods of the struggle without interference from either so-called left-wing or right-wing groups of the minorities who arrogantly appropriate themselves the right to plan and think for the Africans. We wish to emphasize that the freedom of the African means the freedom of all in South Africa, the Europeans included, because only the African can guarantee the establishment of a genuine democracy in which all men will be citizens of a common state and will live and be governed as individuals and not as distinct sectional groups. In conclusion, I wish to state that the Africanists do not at all subscribe to the fashionable doctrine of South African exceptionalism. Our contention is that South Africa is an integral part of the indivisible whole that is Africa. She cannot solve the problem in isolation from and with utter disregard of the rest of the continent. Against multiracialism, we have this objection, that the history of South Africa has fostered group prejudices and antagonisms, and we have to maintain the same group exclusiveness parading under the term of multiracialism, then we shall be transporting into the new Africa these very antagonisms and conflicts. Further, multiracialism is in fact a pandering to European bigotry and arrogance. It is a method of safeguarding white interests irrespective of population figures. In that sense, it's a complete negation of democracy. To use the term multiracialism implies that there are such a basic inseparable differences between the various national groups that there has to be a best course that is to keep them permanently distinctive in a kind of democratic apartheid. That is to us racialism multiplied, which is probably what the term truly connotes. We aim politically at a government of the Africans, by the Africans, for Africans, with everybody who owes his only loyalty to Africa and who is prepared to accept the democratic rule of an African majority, being regarded as an African. We guarantee no minority rights because we think in terms of individuals, not groups. Economically, we aim at the rapid expansion of industrial development in order to alleviate pressure on the land, which is what progress means in terms of modern society. We stand committed to a policy guaranteeing the most equitable distribution of wealth. Socially, we aim at the full development of the human personality and a ruthless uplawing and outlawing of all forms or manifestations of the racial myth. To sum it up, we stand for an Africanist socialist democracy. Here is a tree rooted in African soil, nourished with waters from the rivers of Africa. Come and sit under its shade and become, with us, leaves of the same branch and branches of the same tree. Then, sons and daughters of Africa, I declare this inaugural convention of the Africanists open. Israel.